The distance you have felt is real, but the reason behind it is not what your wounded heart has been whispering to you in the quiet. This is not the story of someone forgetting you. It is the story of someone standing at the edge of a truth so powerful that they no longer know how to approach you without revealing everything they have tried to hide. And before this message ends, you will understand why their silence has grown heavier, why their eyes seem to turn away when their heart is pulling closer, and why one unfinished sentence has been following them everywhere they go. For several days, your soulmate has been moving through life as though nothing has changed. They wake up, reach for their phone, and pause over your name longer than they would ever admit. They begin messages, erase them, and lock the screen as though closing a door before anyone can see what is inside. To the outside world, they appear composed. They answer questions. They laugh when laughter is expected. They continue with ordinary routines. But there is one moment each day when the performance breaks. It happens when they are alone. Perhaps it is late at night, when the room is dim and the sound of traffic fades beyond the window. Perhaps it happens in the morning, before anyone else is awake. Their shoulders loosen. Their guarded expression changes. And for a few unprotected seconds, they allow themselves to remember the exact way you made them feel understood. That memory is the reason they have been keeping their distance. Not because it meant too little. Because it meant too much. There was a moment between you that you may have considered small. You may not even realize how deeply it entered their heart. It could have been something you said without planning it, a look you gave when they were trying to hide their sadness, or the simple way you stayed gentle when they expected you to become cold. You did not demand an explanation. You did not force them to open a door they were not ready to open. You simply saw them. And being seen frightened them more than being rejected ever could. Your soulmate has spent years learning how to remain emotionally protected. They became skilled at revealing only what felt safe. They learned when to smile, when to change the subject, and when to disappear before someone could ask the question they were afraid to answer. Their distance did not begin with you. It began long before you entered their life. But you are the first person who made that old defense feel impossible to maintain. They tried to convince themselves that the connection would pass. They told themselves that a little space would calm everything down. They believed that if they waited long enough, the intensity would fade and they could return to you with a lighter heart. Instead, the distance made every feeling louder. One evening, while sitting across from someone they trusted, your soulmate heard a question they were not prepared for. Why do you become so quiet whenever their name comes up? The room changed in that instant. There may have been a cup cooling between their hands. A lamp may have cast a warm circle of light across the table. The person speaking did not accuse them or press too hard. They simply noticed what your soulmate had hoped no one would notice. Your soulmate looked away. They gave a small laugh, but it carried no joy. I don't know what you mean, they answered. Yet even as the words left their mouth, they knew the answer was untrue. The other person remained silent, allowing the truth to settle without being chased. That silence became a mirror. Your soulmate could no longer distract themselves from what they had been doing. They had not stepped away because they felt nothing. They had stepped away because every interaction with you was leading them toward a choice. Would they continue protecting the life they had built around emotional caution? Or would they risk becoming known? That question followed them home. As they walked through the night, they replayed your last meaningful exchange. The streetlights stretched shadows across the pavement. A cool breeze moved through the trees. People passed without noticing the storm behind your soulmate's calm face. They remembered something in your voice. You had not begged them to stay. You had not tried to make them feel guilty. There was a quiet dignity in the way you gave them space, and that dignity unsettled them. They had expected your sadness. They had prepared for your anger. What they had not prepared for was the possibility that you would quietly accept their distance and continue growing without them. For the first time, they wondered whether they had waited too long. That thought changed the emotional energy within them. Until then, your soulmate believed they controlled the distance. They believed they could return whenever they felt ready, and the connection would still be waiting in the exact place where they had left it. But suddenly, they understood that your heart was not an abandoned room. You were still living. Still healing. Still becoming stronger. And there was something else they began to fear. What if someone else noticed the light in you while they were still hiding from it? They tried to dismiss that thought as jealousy, but it went deeper. It was not simply the idea of losing your attention. It was the possibility of losing the one person who had made them imagine a different version of themselves. Near you, they had briefly seen who they could become without all the walls. That vision had stayed with them. Your soulmate remembers a particular day when you were speaking about something ordinary, yet your expression suddenly changed. You grew quiet, as though you had sensed the sadness beneath their words. You asked, "Are you really okay?" It was a simple question. But no one had asked it that way before. Most people asked because they expected a quick answer. You asked as though you were willing to hear the truth. Your soulmate almost told you everything. For 1 second, the confession rose to their lips. They wanted to explain why closeness made them anxious. They wanted to tell you about the disappointment that taught them never to rely too heavily on anyone. They wanted to admit that their feelings for you had grown far beyond what they knew how to manage. Then an old memory interrupted them. They remembered another time they trusted someone with the most vulnerable parts of themselves. They remembered promises that sounded permanent and an ending that arrived without warning. That old wound spoke louder than your kindness. So they smiled and said, "I'm fine." You knew they were not. But you did not expose them. That mercy became unforgettable. Now, every time they create more distance, they remember that moment. They wonder whether you saw the fear in their eyes. They wonder whether you understood that, "I'm fine," actually meant, "Please do not leave, but please do not come any closer until I know how to survive this." The contradiction has been exhausting them. Part of them hopes you will reach out. Another part fears that if you do, they will finally say too much. And recently, something happened that made silence much harder to maintain. Your soulmate found something connected to you. It may have been an old message, a photograph, a saved voice note, or a small object they had forgotten was still nearby. They were not searching for it. It appeared during an ordinary moment, and the suddenness of it stopped them completely. For a while, they simply stared. The world around them continued the hum of an appliance, the sound of footsteps in another room, distant music, but your soulmate heard none of it. They were pulled backward into a memory they had been trying not to revisit. In that memory, you were laughing. Not politely. Not cautiously. You were laughing with the kind of freedom that made them want to protect the moment from everything painful in the world. They remembered how your face softened when you looked at them, and they finally admitted something they had refused to name. They did not only miss your presence. They missed who they were when they were with you. That realization brought them to the edge of tears. Yet the greatest twist was still waiting. Because later that same day, the person who had questioned them before called again. This time, the conversation did not remain gentle. "You are going to lose them," the person said. "Not because they stopped caring, but because you keep asking them to understand a silence you refuse to explain." Your soulmate's breathing changed. They wanted to defend themselves. They wanted to say they needed more time. They wanted to insist that distance was the only way to prevent another painful mistake. But the person on the other end replied, "You are not preventing pain. You are choosing it slowly." Those words landed differently. Your soulmate ended the call and sat in complete stillness. For the first time, they saw their behavior through your eyes. They imagined the confusion you may have carried. They pictured you replaying conversations, searching for the mistake that made them withdraw. They understood that while they had been calling their distance protection, you may have experienced it as rejection. That realization brought a new kind of guilt. Not the guilt that seeks punishment. The guilt that awakens responsibility. Your soulmate began writing a message. The first line said, "I need to explain why I pulled away." They stared at it for several minutes. Then they continued. They wrote that you had done nothing wrong. They wrote that your kindness had reached a place in them they had kept hidden for years. They admitted that the more they cared, the more vulnerable they felt. Each sentence became more honest than the one before. But then they stopped. Their thumb hovered above the send button. A thought entered their mind: what if honesty came too late? They imagined you reading the message with a heart that had already started closing. They imagined you responding with politeness instead of warmth. They imagined discovering that the space they created had finally become permanent. So they deleted the message. But they did not delete the truth. The truth had already been written, and once written, it could no longer be denied. That night, your soulmate dreamed of you. In the dream, you were standing at the far end of a long hallway filled with open doors. Light streamed in behind you. They called your name, but no sound came from their mouth. They tried to walk toward you, yet every step became heavier. Then you turned. Your expression was not angry. That was what frightened them most. You looked peaceful. You looked like someone who had learned how to release what would not choose them. Your soulmate woke with tears on their face and one clear thought beating through their chest. I have to tell them before they stop waiting. But when morning came, another discovery changed everything. They received information about you, something they had not expected to hear. It did not come through gossip, and it was not meant to cause trouble. It came through someone who had recently seen you or spoken with you. The message was simple. You seem different now. Your soulmate asked what that meant. The reply came after a pause. They seemed stronger. Like they finally decided they deserve clarity. Your soulmate read those words twice. Then a third time. The possibility of losing you no longer felt distant. It felt immediate. They stood near a window, watching sunlight move across the floor. Their phone was in their hand. Your name was on the screen again. This time, instead of writing, they considered calling. Their heart began to race. Not because they did not know what to say. Because they knew exactly what they had to say. They had to reveal that their distance was never caused by a lack of love. It was caused by the terrifying discovery that their feelings for you had become more serious than anything they had planned. They had to admit that they were afraid you could become the person whose absence would truly break them. But there was one more truth beneath that confession. A truth they had hidden even from themselves until now. Your soulmate had recently made a private decision about their future, and that decision involved you far more deeply than you could imagine. They had been preparing something in silence, not a game, not a test, but a step that would require them to stop hiding completely. That was why they had pulled back so suddenly. They were not trying to disappear. They were trying to gather the courage to return differently. And now, as they looked at your name glowing on the screen, they finally pressed the call button. The first ring sounded. Then the second. Their hands began to tremble. But just before the call could connect, something appeared on their screen, something from you that made their breath catch and forced them to realize that the conversation they had been postponing might already have changed forever. My beloved child. The screen remained illuminated in trembling hands. The ringing stopped. Not because the courage had disappeared, but because something unexpected appeared before the call could reach you. It was a quiet reminder, one of those small digital memories that arrives without invitation. A photograph. A moment once shared. Nothing dramatic. No grand declaration. Just a simple image filled with genuine smiles, captured on an ordinary day that neither of you realized would become unforgettable. Your soulmate stared at it in complete silence. The picture revealed something they had spent months trying to deny. Every wall they had built, every excuse they had repeated, every carefully measured step backward suddenly looked fragile beside one undeniable truth. They had never been walking away from you. They had been walking away from the version of themselves that believed love always ended in disappointment. For the first time, they understood that the greatest distance between two hearts is not measured in miles or unanswered messages. It is measured by fear. And fear had been making every decision. They lowered the phone and closed their eyes. The room around them felt strangely still, as if time itself had paused to give them one final opportunity to choose differently. Outside, life continued as always. Cars passed. Birds called from nearby trees. The evening breeze carried familiar sounds through an open window. But inside, everything had changed. They whispered words no one else could hear. I don't want fear to write the rest of this story. That single sentence became the beginning of a transformation. Instead of asking whether you would reject them, they began asking a different question. What if honesty is worth the risk? It was a question they had avoided for far too long. As they reflected on every memory you shared, they realized something beautiful. You had never demanded perfection. You had never expected them to have every answer. What you offered was something much gentler. A place where truth could exist without shame. The more they remembered your kindness, the more clearly they saw the mistake they had made. They thought distance would protect both of you. Instead, it had protected only the fear that kept whispering, "Stay hidden. Stay safe. Never let anyone matter this much." But love does not flourish inside locked rooms. It grows where honesty is finally allowed to breathe. Your soulmate stood before a mirror that evening. They hardly recognized the person looking back. Not because their appearance had changed, but because their heart had. The person staring back was tired. Tired of pretending indifference. Tired of rehearsing conversations that never happened. Tired of wondering what might have been if only they had trusted what they felt. In that quiet reflection, another realization arrived. You had never been asking them for certainty. You had only been hoping for sincerity. And sincerity was something they could finally give. Across the same evening, you were living your own quiet chapter. You had not stopped living simply because someone became distant. You continued healing in ways that no one else could fully see. You found small moments of peace where confusion once lived. You discovered that your worth had never depended on another person's readiness. That inner growth was gentle. It did not harden your heart. It strengthened it. You learned that genuine love never asks you to lose yourself while waiting. Instead, it encourages you to become even more fully yourself. Without realizing it, your own quiet transformation became the very thing your soulmate needed to witness. Because when someone truly loves another person, seeing them grow does not create resentment. It creates admiration. Your soulmate no longer wished to meet the version of you that was waiting in uncertainty. They wanted to meet the version of you who had become stronger through patience, wiser through silence, and brighter through hope. That realization filled them with unexpected peace. Later that night, they opened a blank page not to hide behind another unsent message, but to write honestly for themselves. They listed every reason they had kept their distance. Fear of rejection. Fear of repeating the past. Fear of disappointing someone they deeply admired. Fear of becoming emotionally dependent. One by one, they looked at each fear until another truth quietly emerged. None of those fears had been caused by you. They belonged to old chapters that had already ended. Yet they had unknowingly asked you to carry their weight. Their eyes filled with tears not because they felt condemned, but because healing had finally begun. Healing often begins with a simple admission. I was wrong about what love required. Love had never asked them to become fearless. It had only asked them to become honest. The next morning arrived with sunlight spilling across the room. Everything outside appeared ordinary. But ordinary mornings sometimes become the birthplace of extraordinary decisions. This time, they did not overthink. They did not rewrite messages. They did not search for the perfect words. Instead, they chose authenticity over perfection. The conversation that followed was not filled with dramatic speeches. There were pauses. Gentle laughter. Moments where emotion spoke louder than sentences. There were admissions that felt overdue. I pulled away because I cared more than I knew how to handle. I thought I was protecting us. I realize now I was protecting my fear. Those words carried no manipulation. No pressure. Only truth. And truth has a remarkable way of creating space for understanding. Whether your paths unfold immediately or gradually, something essential had already changed. The silence no longer controlled the story. Honesty did. Perhaps the future still held conversations that needed patience. Perhaps there were still steps to take before everything felt complete. Real relationships are rarely transformed in a single moment. They are transformed through repeated choices to show up with openness instead of hiding behind fear. That is exactly what had begun. The distance that once seemed impossible to understand had revealed its true purpose. It exposed wounds that could finally heal. It uncovered fears that could finally be released. Most importantly, it reminded both hearts that genuine connection is never sustained by guessing what another person feels. It is sustained by the courage to speak with kindness. So if you have ever wondered why someone seemed to drift away, remember this fictional story as a gentle reminder rather than a prediction. Sometimes people step back because they care too little. But sometimes they step back because they care so deeply that they become afraid of losing something precious before they have learned how to receive it. The greatest victory is not pretending fear never existed. The greatest victory is refusing to let fear have the final word. As this story comes to its close, imagine a sunrise stretching across the horizon. The long night has not been erased, it has simply given way to new light. Every unanswered question has become part of a journey that led both hearts toward greater honesty, deeper compassion, and a clearer understanding of what authentic love truly requires. May your heart always recognize its own worth, even during seasons of uncertainty. May you find the courage to choose truth over fear, peace over confusion, and hope over doubt. May every relationship in your life be shaped by kindness, patience, wisdom, and sincere communication. And may your path be filled with unexpected moments of healing that arrive exactly when your spirit is ready to receive them. If this fictional inspirational story touched your heart, brought you comfort, or reminded you of the power of honesty, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Until our next story, may peace walk beside you, may love strengthen your spirit, and may every new day remind you that the most beautiful chapters often begin the moment fear finally lets go.